The message arrived without warning, slipping through the relay network in a sterile packet of compressed pulses. No greeting, no embellishment, just coordinates, a timestamp, and a single directive. Comply with Galactic Disarmament Statute 4407 within 72 standard hours. Failure will be treated as hostile intent. It unfolded in the operations center of Outpost Ixion, 9 like a death sentence read aloud. Cold, bright light flooded the steel-boned room, gleaming off scuffed consoles and old alloy bulkheads. Atmospheric processors throbbed behind the walls, slow and wheezing from years of neglect. A faint haze hung in the air, mineral dust stirred from boots and recycled heat. Commander Mira Kade stood at the central terminal, motionless. The message flickered across her retinal uplink as her eyes remained fixed on nothing. A tremor moved down her jawline before she spoke. Shut the external relays. All of them. The techs hesitated. No one argued. Around her, the senior staff clustered in silence. Sergeant Nathan Varl leaned against the reinforced doorframe, arms crossed, a faint sheen of or dust still clinging to his mining harness. Dr. Elon re-hovered near the environmental monitors, his expression unreadable, hands clasped behind his back like a man awaiting sentencing. Behind them, terminals clicked and hissed, fed by processors a generation behind galactic standard. Ixion 9 had no AI support grid, no orbital mesh uplink. Everything ran hot and old. Kade turned from the console. No one answers that transmission. They understood. In the silence that followed, the weight of 72 hours began to press into every corner of the station. Ixion 9 had not started as a fortress. It had been a survey hub for mineral scouting, then a deep-bore mining outpost built into the guts of asteroid K-23. After the loads dried and corporate funding dried with them, it lingered as a logistics point, a nowhere place where Earth's long logistical arms couldn't quite reach. Freight haulers stopped to barter fuel, scavengers brought salvage to trade, and sometimes, fugitives slipped through for a place to disappear. It was the kind of place where time congealed into ritual. Wake up, check the seals, skim the recycler output, rotate the crops in hydroponics. Weld what was leaking, patch what was broken, recycle what couldn't be saved. Repeat. Ixion had no glamour, no illusions, no ideology. Only gravity, steel, and breath. The outpost clung to the asteroid like rust on a blade. It wasn't carved cleanly. It sprawled in a lattice of bolted modules, blast-shielded tunnels, and reinforced scaffolding that wrapped around the asteroid's axis like a constrictor. Its docking arms drooped like broken limbs, half buried in slag. The hull bore the scars of micrometeoroid impacts and shield failure pockmarks, patched with field-welded plating, scavenged ship armor, and anything that would hold pressure. Most of the solar panels had been dismantled and converted into directional jammers and heat dispersal baffles. Inside, the corridors ran tight and narrow. Gravity fluctuated subtly between decks. Some zones ran heavy, others float light from unbalanced spin. Each district had a nickname: the spine for engineering, the gut for recycling and water, cold side for unheated storage near the starboard hull. Command sat atop a reinforced lift shaft, elevated for tactical oversight, and shielded against first-strike orbital impact. Every bulkhead had been re-welded and triple-sealed. Smells of lubricant, ozone, rust, and hydroponic mold fused into a baseline odor that clung to skin and clothes. Even silence here wasn't quiet. It throbbed with the slow heartbeat of systems fighting entropy. But the outpost had survived, and now it was about to defy. In the converted drill hangars, men and women who had once cracked stone for rare metals now repurposed their tools for war. Miners, scavengers, and tinkerers hunched over disassembled machines, welding torches painting the walls in bursts of blue and orange. Where once excavation rigs churned into iron veins, now they stood as the skeletons of weapons, rotating spike throwers, compressed gas bombards, and battery-fed coil guns salvaged from a derelict freighter. Sergeant Varl walked the catwalk overhead, watching the crews below. His steps echoed across the grated steel. He wore no uniform, just a reinforced harness stripped of corporate logos, pockets packed with tools and fasteners. His face, weathered and angular, bore the kind of expression that never softened, even in sleep. Harpoon rigs firing out of sync, he muttered into his hand mic. Check the flux timing on the second capacitor. If it surges again, we'll blow the whole rack. A voice crackled back. Copy. Pulling it now. He moved on, eyes scanning each workstation. At the far end, an older processor had been retooled into a projectile press. Children, orphans, and station-born fed scrap into the maw of the machine, shaping shrapnel loads under adult supervision. No one was idle. On Ixion, survival was the only currency, and labor the only measure of loyalty. Above, the ceiling showed signs of stress, heat warping, old impact lines. They'd reinforced it with spare bulkheads and turned some of the station's spin stabilizer shafts into makeshift launch ports. They weren't building for victory. They were building to hurt something bigger than them. In the command dome, Kade stared at the central hologrid, an outdated model with static bleed and pixel gaps. It showed the asteroid field in a spiraling loop, with Ixion's position highlighted in pulsing amber. Red dots, PCS recon drones, circled the outer belt. 3 so far, with matched trajectories. Not stealth. Not subtle. Infrared scatter from the lower hull, said a technician. They're pinging our heat lines. Intermittent noise near cold side 2, another added. Like micro-drone wings. Kade opened a channel to Ree. They're watching. Getting closer. Yes, Ree replied, voice hushed. They're modeling behavioral response. Kade knew. The polity of concordant species didn't send diplomats to human fringe settlements. They sent drones to watch, then drones to judge. Then the ships came. She looked away from the map and walked to the viewport. The dome was old terraglass, scratched and slightly warped, but still held pressure. Outside, the stars burned cold. Far in the distance, the core light of a collapsed dwarf flickered over the edges of the Chal rift. It cast Ixion in blue-tinged shadow. A beautiful, dead thing. She reached into her pocket. A locket. Inside, faded, water-stained, was a photo of her daughter, 9 years old, smiling through missing teeth, sun behind her on a hill that no longer had a name. That photo had gone into cryo with her. It was the only thing the cold hadn't stolen. She touched the glass. No help was coming. The council met in the mess hall, if it could still be called that. It smelled faintly of mildew and engine coolant. The air scrubbers above the old galley hissed at irregular intervals. Chairs had long since broken. Crates and wiring spools stood in their place. The old rules of hierarchy had decayed years ago. Now, everyone had a say, even if it meant nothing. Ree arrived late, eyes hollow. His coat still carried the scent of electrical fire. Kade stood before them without ceremony. We received the directive. 72 hours. The PCS has posted observation drones. If we disarm, we become a demonstration of compliance. If we don't, they escalate. A short, scornful laugh came from Varl. Ardent Reach disarmed, and they were sterilized by orbit. Murmurs spread. No confirmation had ever come. Only silence. Ardent Reach had once been the largest of the outer Terran settlements. Now, it was a name used in whispers. Ree spoke next. We can't win a war. We have no fleet. No shield net. Our food reserves barely last 6 weeks without hydroponics. If they breach the tanks, then we starve, Kade said. Or we fight, and we die fighting. More silence. The weight of exhaustion was thicker than fear. Most of these people had not left the outpost in years. Some had never known another sky. An older woman, her arms blackened with old plasma scars, leaned forward. What if we make them bleed? Enough to show others they're not invincible. Kade met her eyes. That's the idea. 50 hours remained. Engineering corridors became kill zones. Ceiling vents were laced with coil-fed flares. Bulkheads fitted with false panels hid pressure charge mines. Every hallway was mapped by hand and loaded into personal slates. Kade instituted 2-man patrols, 2 shifts per cycle. Every section required clearance. No blind spots. No unknowns. She walked the lengths herself, every corridor, every heat vent. She checked junction boxes and opened storage hatches. The station was her skin now. Every scar, every fault, she memorized like a nervous system. Dr. Ree remained in hydroponics, reinforcing the water purifiers and installing last resort chemical scrubbers. The plants, leafy, broad-bladed stalks genetically altered to tolerate poor light, rustled softly in the stale air. It smelled of moss and damp metal. Peaceful. A lie. He paused at a planter, watching a row of sprouting beans. Behind him, water dripped from a cracked filter line. They were building a war machine out of a decaying lung. At 32 hours, the PCS drone began transmitting open band. No translation, just a pulsing tone, mathematically spaced, gradually increasing in frequency. A warning rhythm. A countdown. Kate played it in the command dome. It buzzed in the bones. She sat alone, back straight, badge in hand. Old enamel, chipped. Earthfleet brass. She'd kept it long after the fleet stopped caring. Long after Earth stopped sending. She looked again at the locket. The smile. The hill. She set the badge down beside it. Let them come. Ixion, 9 would not kneel. The noise never stopped. Deep within Ixion, 9, the forge chambers hammered without pause, reshaping the past into something lethal. Old hull fragments became armor plating. Mining detonators were fused into crude-shaped charges. Fuel lines ran red with battery fluid siphoned from dead shuttles. In the deafening heart of the spine, the outpost's industrial soul screamed against the inevitable. Sergeant Varl stood waist-deep in a cracked coolant trench, arms soaked to the elbows, guiding a laser cutter through the casing of a thermal regulator. Sweat mingled with grime across his brow as sparks danced upward, vanishing into the gloom. His voice carried over the noise. "We're losing pressure in auxiliary vent lines," he barked, not turning. "Flush the upper sealant tanks, then reroute from cold side." A younger tech scrambled to obey, slipping on wet metal. Behind them, 2 more crews moved heavy rigging toward a wall of stacked oxygen canisters, each marked with fading hazard glyphs. Half the contents were unstable. No one cared. The spine, once the maintenance artery of the station, had become a crucible. Redundant systems were cannibalized for defense. Varl had drawn schematics in grease on the walls, firing corridors, fallback chambers, blast trapdoors. The deeper one descended into the outpost, the more the space shifted, less station, more bunker. Racks of rail spikes. A harpoon gun jury-rigged to the ceiling. Motion mines hung like fruit from maintenance ducts. "Where are the drill cores?" Varl called. 3 active, 2 in overhaul, came the answer. "Keep the charges. Pull the servos." The temperature in the spine fluctuated wildly. 1 hour, heat from the generator relays choked the air into a haze. The next, coolant vapors condensed into frost at the ducts. Streaks of black smog curled against the grated ceilings. Breathers were in short supply. Varl worked without one. Each tool had a history, hammered, salvaged, stripped from half-dead stations or scavenged wrecks. Even the armor plates used to reinforce the emergency blast doors bore serial codes from a long-gone corporate fleet. Logos had been burned away, but the metal remembered who once claimed it. Across the forge chamber, a boy no older than 14 stood beside a bank of thermal welders. He carried a slate with measurements and waited for the next call. Varl met his eyes briefly. No words passed. In Ixion, everyone earned their weight in labor. Even children. A loud ping rang through the overhead pipes. Not pressure. Not temperature. Varl tensed. The sound came again, measured, mechanical. Like sonar. Above, in coalside, frost coated the outer plating. The cold was worse here, poor insulation, no heat circulation, proximity to the vacuum beyond. Ice grew in quiet veins along the floor. Condensation turned railings slick. Still, the work never slowed. Dr. Ree moved with careful steps through a corridor stacked high with salvaged photovoltaic arrays and battery cells. Coalside had once been a storage bay for ice, ore, and mineral samples. Now, it housed the last stable backup grid, a secondary life support node, barely functional. Each battery was old tech. Nickel graphene cells from a bygone era, prone to thermal runaway. He ran diagnostics by hand, adjusting charge values with analog tools. Digital overlays were unreliable in this region of the outpost. Too much interference from jury-rigged power lines. He reached the relay core and opened the panel. A flicker of static danced across the wiring. Arc scars lined the interface. With bare fingers, he rerouted the energy coupling, breathing slowly to keep the tremor in his hands at bay. The emergency systems pulsed. Capacitor arrays spun up in a low whine. A sound echoed behind him. A faint mechanical chirr, not metal, not human. He turned slowly toward the viewport. Beyond the warped glass, a PCS recon drone floated, motionless. It hung in the void like a dead seed pod. Bone-white crescent chassis. Long ventral stalks trailing like static tendrils. Its hull shimmered with pulses of liquid light, stealth camo, imperfect this close. One stalk twitched. Another angled toward the window. A thin blue beam scanned the outer hull. Ree's breath caught. He stepped back, not daring to blink. The drone didn't fire. It simply watched. Then the lights flickered. In the operations center, Mira Kade stared at the flickering telemetry feed. The PCS was probing power cycles now. Not just watching, syncing, interfering. Testing. A proximity ping sounded. Another drone. Fifth confirmed. One drifting lower. She opened a comm line. Phase 3 confirmed. Begin fallback tests on habitat blocks 2 and 4. Set decoy pings from mining sector to mask hydroponics. Copy. Routing ghost pulses. Kade muted the screen and leaned forward, hands braced against the console's edges. Sweat slicked her palms. The map of the belt spun slowly, red marks creeping inward. There were no reinforcements. There were no margins left. She reached under the console and pulled out a folded sheet, paper, rare now. Handwritten notes and tactical estimates. She traced a line marked Option D, core detonation. A last resort, circled in red. A distant vibration passed through the floor. Something near the spine had just failed. In hydroponics, a warning alarm blared. Reed dashed across the chamber. Water levels spiked on Basin C, salinity overflow. He yanked the manual override and flushed the contaminated cycle. Half the bed's roots would die. He didn't hesitate. The pumps groaned as the filtration system screamed under the strain. A wet stench rose from ruptured biomass. He stepped back, panting. The beans in Basin C withered as their nutrient feed cut off. A week's worth of food, gone in moments. The air stank of algae death. He stared at the curved glass above, at the silent cold stars. His hand shook as he reached to stabilize the remaining pumps. The hangar was dim, lit by weak lumen strips. The floor bore impact scars from past loading failures. Grease smeared the walls in wide arcs. It smelled of heat and metal fatigue. Only one ship remained, the Ixion, a short-haul or runner re-engineered into an armored blockade vessel. Thick with composite plating, its hull bore the scars of atmospheric burns and kinetic impacts. Varl stood beside it now, his hand on its outer bulkhead. He climbed into the cockpit. The names etched into the hull behind him were more than a memorial. They were a ledger of what Ixion had cost. Behind him, auxiliary plating sparked with fresh welds. A turret had been mounted, salvaged, hand-cranked, barely aligned. He ran his fingers across the control stick, then shut the canopy with a hiss. The ship would never leave. But it could still fight. In the silence of her quarters, Kade opened a drawer beneath the bed. Inside, among folded spare uniforms and a sealed flask, was a small black cube, one of the original memory cores from Earthfleet's long-range archives. She powered it. Old footage. Earth sky. The Academy parade grounds. Her daughter's face, years younger, spinning in place with arms wide beneath the sun. The footage paused. A single pixel blinked where data degradation had eaten into the image. Even memories were corroding here. She powered it off. Time to prepare the message. She sat, pulled the recorder toward her, and began to speak, not for Earth, but for what might follow after. They told us to forget who we are. But we remember. We remember what silence meant at Ardent Reach. We remember the screams no one came to stop. We remember that when the strong demand peace, they really mean submission. We will not be silenced. Not while we breathe. This is Ixion. And we are still here. She saved the message to 4 relay nodes. 1 local. 3 deep archive. 1 routed through a decaying comm buoy last used 2 years ago to hail an unregistered hauler. If even one reached the outer colonies, the words would survive. She encrypted the payload manually. It took 23 minutes. When she stood, her knees ached. At 22 hours, the drone formation shifted. 5 now. 1 moved closer. It wasn't watching anymore. It was marking targets. The countdown had begun. The attack began with silence. At 19 hours remaining, the 6th drone breached Ixion's magnetosphere without a single emission spike. Its hull distorted local telemetry just enough to be missed by half the station's aging sensors. No energy signature. No radiation bleed. It slid through the cold like a splinter in flesh. It positioned itself just above the southern ventral layer, hovering beyond the reach of the station's makeshift turrets. Then it sent a pulse short, focused, mathematically perfect. The command relays in Sector 3 flickered. Lights dimmed. For airlock systems cycled without orders. In the spine, Varl felt it first. A shift in the floor. A hum in the walls. Then came the roar. An external maintenance bay explosively decompressed. The blast chewed through a service corridor, pulling machinery, tools, and 2 workers into the vacuum before the emergency shutters slammed shut. Varl sprinted through the dark toward the rupture zone, breath raw in his lungs. He reached the bulkhead just as the last seal hissed closed. Blood painted the viewport. A hand, untethered, floated past, fingertips trailing crimson arcs. Varl stared, jaw clenched, then turned without a word. "Get the internal pressure maps updated," he growled. "Reroute plasma lines around Sector 3. We're not losing lighting this deep." He did not ask who was lost. He already knew. The station's intercom stuttered. Voices clipped. Signal redundancy was failing. In a darkened monitoring node above the spine, a lone technician checked readouts scrawled across a cracked multi-slate. Signal pings from airlock sensors returned null. Temperature reports from Deck 5 dropped to 0. Gravity fields blinked. On, off, on. He didn't report it. There was no one left in Deck 5. And no backup node. He marked it, then moved on. Cole's side shook. Ree was thrown to the floor as a vibration rolled through the outer hull. Tool racks fell. A battery stack tipped over and caught fire. Flames bloomed blue-green as old chemical seals ruptured. The emergency suppressors kicked in seconds late. Coughing, Ree grabbed the suppressant lance and slammed it into the base of the fire. The mist hissed as it swallowed flame, coating the bulkhead in fine white frost. The drone was close. He could feel its heat signature pulsing on the exterior thermals, even through shielding. It wasn't just observing anymore. It was scanning, probing, transmitting. He accessed a local port and rerouted auxiliary power through a decoy coil above the ops dome. If they wanted to map energy patterns, he'd give them a lie to chase. The coil hissed, then stabilized. A hum of false signal surged from the outer dome, painting a phantom heat bloom across the station's skin. Outside, unseen, the drone pivoted. Ree leaned against the wall and wiped the frost from his visor. Another fire. Another near collapse. But they were still breathing. In hydroponics, the lights failed. Kate arrived within minutes, drawn by the silence. The plants were still, no airflow, no water cycling, no life. She moved through rows of hanging vines and wilted greens, her boots whispering against the damp floor. Dr. Ree emerged from behind a curtain of dehumidifier tubing, face pale, breath fast. "They cut the power," he said, or mimicked a load spike. "Either way, we're blind. If they hit the pumps again." Kate didn't answer. She moved to the control panel and manually triggered the backup cycling. The water returned with a reluctant groan. The air filtered thinly. But everything was slower now. The reserve systems had never been built for long-term function. If they failed again, it would not be a technical issue. It would be a death sentence. She looked over the crops, rows of engineered tubers, nutrient root beds, artificial humidity grids. Black mold crept along one basin. Ree hadn't had time to sterilize it. "This was always the line," she muttered. Ree nodded. "It's just moving closer." At 17 hours, the first counterstrike launched. Varl oversaw the deployment. 2 improvised torpedoes, each packed with stripped mining explosives and scavenged magnetic rails, fired from concealed shafts in the asteroid wall. No guidance. No tracking. But the drones weren't meant to be killed. They were meant to be warned. The first torpedo missed. The second struck. A single drone fractured in silence, its stalks curling inward as the explosion warped its hull. No fire, no debris trail, just a hard silence in the telemetry feed where once there had been motion. The others did not retreat. They adjusted. Varl stood in the launch silo's dark hatchway, one hand pressed to the warm outer hull. He could feel vibrations passing through the rock. Not tremors, engine wake. He said nothing. He simply walked back to the core, faster than before. Within the command dome, Cade monitored the response. 2 new signals entered the field. Not drones. Not scouts. Destroyers. They arrived through the rift wall without acceleration signatures, their drives dark. Bone-white hulls bristling with folded weapon ports. Crewless. Silent. Death-given geometry. Cade turned away from the screens. She had expected this. "I want all fallback corridors prepped. Compress non-essential volumes. Move crew to inner core sectors. This is going to ground." She paused at the viewport. The destroyers were still at a distance. They had not fired. Yet, on the wall beside her, the station's last functioning weathered chronometer clicked 1 minute closer to midnight. As she left, a hallway near the dome swelled with movement. Families relocating to deep interior sectors. Children clutched emergency packs. An old man carried a dented oxygen tank. Cade nodded once as she passed. No one spoke. Inside the mess, now converted to a staging center, Varl addressed the assembled crew. Half wore armor. The other half held tools or first aid rigs. No one asked questions. They had already chosen their side. He pointed to a wall map marked in grease and heat scorch. They're coming for systems, not bodies. That means they won't negotiate. They'll dissect, clean, recycle. He looked at the youngest among them. A girl maybe 15, shoulders tense under a mining vest too large for her. You hold your ground. You hold this station. And if you can't, you make sure they pay for every meter they take. Understand? They nodded. The floor vibrated beneath their feet. At 15 hours, the first cutter teams dropped. Sleek black insertion rods, each only a meter wide, impacted the southern hull. They embedded like needles, then bloomed, petals of unfolding metal, cutting torches hissing as they bored inward. The rods didn't impact randomly. Each struck known vent points, mapped conduits, weak seams. The data had been harvested for weeks. One breached through cargo bay 4. Air blew out. Alarm screamed. Inside the breach zone, 2 defenders were waiting. The alien form that emerged was not flesh. It was segmented steel and jointed limbs, its head a featureless disc, its hands layered with precision tools and bone saw blades. No voice. No warning. It advanced. The defenders fired. Flame met alloy. Then the scream of rail spikes. The creature staggered but did not fall. It moved faster. Limbs split. Cutting arms flared. The younger of the two, just out of her teens, fumbled her second reload. The thing reached her first. The older man, name stitched into his torn sleeve, Brenner, grabbed the wall charge cord. He didn't hesitate. Ixion, he whispered. And then the charge lit. The section vented in fire. Above, in the command dome, the breach indicator dimmed. One incursion repelled. Dozens to come. By 13 hours, the station no longer slept. No shifts. No cycle rotation. No light variance. Everywhere, humans held their positions. Engineering hatches doubled as foxholes. Medical bays became triage pits. Hydroponics became a fallback post with air, food, and bulkhead armor woven from agri-harness mesh. In a hallway between bulkheads, Kade passed a sleeping child curled beneath a thermal sheet, beside a handwritten note pinned to a sealed door. Don't open. Decompression risk. She read it once, then walked on. The destroyers still hadn't fired, which meant they were watching. The real war had begun. And Ixion, 9, held the line. The request for aid left Ixion, 9 at 13 hours, 56 minutes. Kade routed the signal through a buried relay buoy outside the Chal Rift, masked beneath the magnetic shadow of a dead moon. The relay's housing had once belonged to a corporate mining drone, long since gutted and retrofitted with a pulse beacon and encrypted burst cache. It blinked once as the data packet cleared the station. Coordinates, situation report, and the message, we are under siege. We do not surrender. No encryption. They wanted it heard. In the command dome, silence followed. No return ping. No acknowledgement. Just the soft, continuous hum of life support units straining beneath power reroutes. The smell of hot copper and ozone filled the air. A strip of insulation curled near a cracked conduit. Every sound felt exaggerated. A shifting boot sole, the high whine of data looping in the signal receiver, the buzz of a flickering panel light. Re-arrived minutes later. He stood in the doorway, helmet tucked under his arm, skin pale beneath cold slicked sweat. No signal. Kade shook her head. Not even a bounce. He crossed the room slowly and sat down. His fingers traced an old dent in the console's edge, the remnants of a long-forgotten impact. They heard. They just chose not to answer. Kade stared through the viewport. We send anyway. Every cycle. He nodded. Until we're gone. 12 hours. The destroyers moved. It began with a ripple through the field, sensor static washing the displays, followed by sudden reorientation. Their hulls shifted, long, smooth plates unlocking to reveal ventral structures like ribs unfurling. No weapons fired. No signal sent. But something had changed. Sensor stalks extended. Targeting vanes unfolded, rotating with precision. Ixion's outer hull lit up with refracted pulses. Rapid, intermittent scans focused on power signatures and interior layouts. Entire corridors became hot zones of electromagnetic saturation. It wasn't probing anymore. It was pre-calibration. The spine was blacked out. Varl's teams shut down every visible relay and sealed access to 10 vertical shafts with blast welds and stacked foamcrete. It would not stop a breaching cutter, but it might slow one. Coldside suffered a cascade failure in atmospheric stabilization. The sector's ducting infrastructure, already brittle from microfractures, collapsed under the sudden intake shock. Frost pushed outward from every vent like a slow-growing fungus. 3 crew collapsed during the failure. Reed dragged them into hydroponics himself, teeth chattering, breath steaming as the air filters slowed to a crawl. He laid them near the grow beds, where the remaining light strips still held. One of them, an engineer from the fuel recycler team, whispered from the floor, "We're already dead." Reed looked at him, then back at the water-stained ceiling. "Not yet," he said. By 11 hours, rumors moved faster than orders. Some claimed the destroyers carried kinetic kill arrays capable of core rupture. Others whispered that synthetic infantry had already breached the station, moving invisibly through the ducts. There were no signs, but there was no sleep either. The mess was quiet now, a communal zone converted to staging. Ration packs stacked neatly along one wall. Every third light flickered. In the center, Kade addressed 12 officers beneath the exposed conduit spines of the central shaft bay. They stood in a loose ring, boots braced on steel marked by burns and repairs. Every face was worn, faces that had been hardened by mining accidents, mechanical failures, slow starvation. War was just another layer. Kade held up the comms log. "We transmitted to EarthGov, Terran Central, and 3 outer colony fleets. All live feeds. All open bands." No reply. No one responded. She nodded to herself. "Then we hold this alone." One of the comms techs, a man with a fused retinal lens and burn scars along his neck, raised a hand. "Do we rebroadcast?" Kade paused. "Yes. Every half cycle. As long as the relay breathes." 9 hours. A message came through, not from Earth, but from another outpost. The signal was weak, warbled, compressed to the point of near collapse. Ree was the first to intercept it. He patched it into the main dome and stabilized it across 3 redundant channels. "This is Talus Gate. We saw your beacon." Confirming hostile AI contact in Theta Verge, they sterilized a medical convoy. No survivors. Dr. Keeman and his team, gone. They took the whole ice shelf offline. "We're shutting down core power. Hiding in rock. If you get this, hold. Hold for us all." Static followed. Then the carrier's signal blinked out entirely. Kade played it again. Then again. She uploaded the file to the mess speaker grid, where it looped without commentary. Crew gathered. No one interrupted. Some stood with heads bowed. One knelt and pressed their palm to the deck. It wasn't a call for help. It was a farewell. 8 hours. The destroyers vanished. Not warped. Not cloaked. Just gone. Telemetry blurred. Sensor bleed rippled outward in a radial flare, scrambling magnetic reference markers. Kade reran diagnostics. Recalibrated. 3 full sweep scans returned null. For several minutes, no one spoke. Then a new contact appeared. Small. Inbound. Not alien. An object, cylindrical, with degraded Terran ident codes. It decelerated on approach with reverse thrusters, manual-grade impulse spines flaring in irregular pulses. It stopped 10 kilometers from the station and drifted. No signal. No beacon. No communication of any kind. Kade ordered a scan. Inside, debris. Residual atmospheric pressure. A frozen rag of synthetic fabric. A medical patch from Earth Fleet, sealed over frostbitten padding. And a fragment of alloy. Bent. Warped. Etched with a name worn to near erasure. Mercy's Reach. It was a coffin. And a message. 7 hours. The pressure cracked. 6 personnel attempted to seize the hangar. Armed with torches and repurposed plasma tools, they moved in darkness and cut through 2 welded bulkheads before being caught. 1 guard died in the scuffle, throat opened by a snapped rigging hook. The attackers were subdued, 3 injured. Kade found one in the infirmary, bleeding from the mouth, coughing quietly against the painkillers. Reworked on the guard. He didn't speak. The mutineer looked at her. "I couldn't. Kade stared at him, then turned and walked away. Outside the infirmary, a row of sleeping bags lined the hallway. Children slept beneath coats, curled next to thermal piping. One held a scrap of cloth with a drawn map of the station. The map had red X's on rooms no longer accessible. Kade paused. A tear welled in her eye, unbidden, hot, unwanted. She wiped it with the back of her hand, then kept walking. 6 hours. The lights dimmed across the core. Emergency power rerouted. Every station pulse was a drumbeat now. Pressure checks, structural readouts, perimeter scans. repeating, echoing, syncopated with breath and tension. In engineering, a secondary passive scanner, once used for subsurface or tracing, was reconfigured to detect high-mass distortions. It lit up for the first time in 3 years. Varl grinned. "We can see them coming now," he said. Repatched it into the command dome's local feed. Ixion still breathed. The destroyers had not returned yet, but the void was moving again. Outside, in the debris field, a dark shape drifted beneath the wreckage of an old mining barge. Sensors flared for a heartbeat, just long enough to register partial return. They were repositioning, preparing for something final. And still, Earth said nothing. But Ixion did not wait. It loaded weapons, charged coil arrays, sealed its wounded decks. It held the line. Alone. 5 hours. The first wave struck like a surgical incision, not shock and awe, precision. For coordinated impacts along the southern arc of Ixion's hull, each a clean entry point for narrowbore cutter pots. Not drones this time. Not scouts. Entry teams. No alarms sounded. Kade only knew when bulkhead pressure readings began to drift, minor anomalies at first. Drops of air pressure, flickers in corridor diagnostics. Then silence from the spine's south junction. Complete blackout. No thermal return, no signal bounce. By the time Varl reached it, the corridor was gone. A 20-meter length of tunnel had been neatly excised, the atmosphere vented into hard vacuum. Frozen blood mist lingered midair, glittering like sand. A severed boot rotated in place beside a wall pylon. Embedded in the steel plating was the shaft of a cutting lance, still glowing at the tip. The wall still radiated heat, faint but present. Varl placed his hand flat against the deck plating and waited. Through the gloves, he felt the hum of approaching footfalls. Subsonic. Too even to be human. He activated the fallback beacon and retreated into the dark. Kade stood above the command table, hand on the scanner feed, face unreadable. She watched red pulses bloom across Ixion's southern hemisphere. For breach points confirmed. Rehovered beside her, reading diagnostics from his slate. "They're not rushing," he murmured. "Every movement is mapped. They're clearing blind spots as they go." Kade said nothing. She tapped the command key. The station lights dimmed again. Fallback pattern C engaged. Power was rerouted from Coalside and the outer reactor ring. Every corridor beyond Sector 4 dropped into darkness. Reactor coolant levels were holding barely, but the main core sat only 2 decks beneath the fallback zone. Above them, the dome lights faded to a dull amber. Kade stared at the outlines of the destroyers on the edge of the tactical grid. Still idle. Still silent. Always watching. Varl pulled his team back to secondary cover near the transfer junction. 10 meters of corridor had been refitted with trip mines and manual flares. Motion beacons flickered red along the floor. Behind them, the defense crews stacked crates and rebar against the blast door. Just before the enemy breached, Varl triggered the trap. The ceiling-mounted salvage coils, old magnetic clamps rewired to pulse against ferrous mass, flared to life. The first one through was silent. A frame of plated alloy, humanoid in silhouette but lacking face or expression. Its left arm ended in a mounted cutter, its right hand gripped a sensor wand pulsing with ultraviolet light. It stepped into the magnetic field and jerked sideways, limbs spasming. The wand shattered against the bulkhead. Another bot behind it collided into the frame, unable to stop. Then the tripwire. The corridor filled with fire. The shaped charge sent a burst of slag and ceramic shrapnel forward. The first bot was torn apart. The second staggered, scraped one arm free, then a second blast hit from above. When the smoke cleared, the team advanced, stepping over the scorched heap. It smelled like burned lubricant and cold metal. No blood. No sound. Just another machine, sent to erase them. For hours. Coalside fell. 2 insertion rods punched through the outer plating beside the emergency power vault. The breach was clean, melting sealant, slamming in grapples, cracking open the mid-tier deck. Rewatched from a pressure viewport above as the access chamber buckled inward. He could see the frost spread along the far wall. The door cracked, then split. He shut the bulkhead manually. 12 crew were lost in seconds. No screams. Just a rush of air and the thump of pressure equalizing through the wall. He stayed there a long moment, hand on the glass, breath fogging the viewport. Then he turned and walked back into the dark. In the hydroponics dome, he initiated the emergency plant harvest. Crops were slashed, bundled, sealed into oxygen-lined storage bins. They wouldn't last a week. But for some, that would be enough. He caught sight of a child's toy left under one of the grow tables, a carved mineral figurine, worn smooth by little hands. He pocketed it. Kade moved through the corridors of Sector 2, checking seal lines and fallback markers. The walls were marked with black soot from earlier incursions. Power lines ran naked along the ceilings, patched with epoxy and fiber mesh. Pressure sensors blinked orange. She passed the sleeping area. The children were gone, moved to the inner core hours ago. In their place, water-stained blankets, a broken light board, an empty food crate repurposed as a toy chest. She crouched beside one of the beds. There, pinned to the frame, was a note in rough handwriting. "If you're reading this, we're still here." She stood, not slowly, with purpose. 3 hours. Breach is now numbered 11. Kade deployed mobile teams to choke points. Varl's units were thinned, stretched across too many corridors. Every fallback corridor became a death trap. Every power junction a bottleneck. They fought with nothing clean. Magnetic spike throwers. Arc welders turned into proximity lances. 2 battery-fed shotcasters burned out within minutes of combat. The enemy didn't shoot. It dissected. Metal limbs split open with hidden blades. Sensor discs rotated with surgical clarity. Every step it took was calculated, mechanical, smooth. And it always paused beside fallen bodies, pausing, scanning, as if learning. Then moved on. And they bled. The med bay overflowed. There was no sedation left. Retied tourniquets with stripped wiring and cauterized wounds with reprogrammed mining torches. The smell was unforgettable. He said nothing. His hands never stopped moving. 2 hours. The command dome's outer viewport cracked. A stray hull breach on Deck 2 had pushed internal pressure off balance. A single shard of debris, a snapped alloy rod, punched through the structural shielding. Kade watched it happen. She didn't flinch. She crossed the dome, opened the emergency control locker, and resealed the breach using a pressure foam rig. Her hands moved like she'd done it 100 times. She probably had. Re-arrived, breath short, carrying a portable med pack. He looked at her, looked at the patch, then said, "We can't hold them forever." "No," she replied. "Just long enough." Behind them, the command systems flickered again. The uplink to the passive mass scanner went dead. The array had been found. 1 hour. No more clean breaches. They began cutting through sealed bulkheads. Not with precision tools, but brute heat. Plasma heads widened. Incursion bots detached from host cutters and stalked the corridors like predators. Automated defenses failed. EMP bursts surged through the wiring. One section of the reactor conduit began to heat too fast, too early. Rerouted coolant manually. Varl stacked his last charges near a blind corridor turn. Kade watched from a tactical feed in a half-lit maintenance alcove, pulse steady. She blinked. Once. Then again. And in that second, alone in the dark, she felt it. Not fear, not fatigue. Just the weight. The weight of being the last wall between something precise and something human. The last fallback node was Sector 1. The reactor core sat 2 levels below. She sent the final relay transmission. Her voice, flat. "To any Terran asset in range. This is Commander Kade. Outpost Ixion is compromised. We are initiating terminal defense protocol. This is not a surrender." A pause. "We are still here." Then the lights failed. The station began to burn. The fire spread too fast to be natural. Ventilation ducts, long ignored in favor of fallback oxygen canisters, channeled the heat like a blade. Smoke filled the corridors. Overload surges popped conduit seals. Emergency relays detonated in blue-white arcs, turning junction nodes into miniature suns. Light dimmed to pulsing amber as subsystem after subsystem failed. The station's internal rhythms, pressure checks, temperature fluctuations, gravity anchors, desynchronized and fractured. By the time the outer decks were abandoned, the interior of Ixion 9 had become a cathedral of smoke and red light. The kind of silence that doesn't fall but rises. Varl sealed the blast doors behind the last of his team. His armor was cracked at the shoulder. One leg limped. His left glove was slick with someone else's blood. Ash clung to the folds of his collar like snow. He leaned against the bulkhead and waited until the last pressure light turned green. Every second, the vibration in the floor changed, growing heavier, closer. Some kind of cutter drone was at work 2 corridors away. Only then did he speak. Sector 1 sealed. No return path. He slumped down beside a damaged power conduit and unhooked his rebreather. Air hissed. Smoke crept under the door's edge, curling low across the floor like ground mist. Sparks blinked from an overhead junction box. He reached into his side pouch and removed a small strip of soldered metal, a tag from a fallen engineer named Kasara. He wiped it clean with the back of his glove and slid it into a slot on the wall beside the fallback schematic. No ceremony. Just a name, added to the others. His eyes closed. And for a moment, in the drifting haze, he imagined the forge. The clanging rhythm of the spine. Sparks flying in arcs, boots pounding metal. A younger voice shouting over the roar. His own, maybe. Or hers. He smiled, just once. And the inner core re-staggered through the last functioning mebe. No lights remained overhead, only the dull red glow of standby beacons pulsing through the haze. 3 patients still lived. 1 unconscious. 2 awake. They didn't speak. Just watched him work with hollow eyes. He fed the last dose of synth oxygen into a cracked pulmonary mask. Stitched a leg wound with wire pulled from a dead sensor node. Resealed a burn with carbon foam scavenged from coolant tubing. One of the conscious patients, a miner from Coldside, opened his eyes briefly. Still, fighting, he rasped. Re-nodded. Still breathing, he whispered back. Then collapsed into a chair and stared at the diagnostic wall. No signals. No vitals. Only static. In the glow, his gaze drifted to a scrap of paper, an old inventory sheet taped to a shelf. Scrawled in the margins was a child's drawing. Earth, green and round. A little shuttle flying toward it. He reached out, touched it gently, and closed his eyes. Kade stood in the center of the command dome. Alone. Outside the viewport, the station's surface began to peel. Slow at first, then in shivering shears of alloy and vapor as thermal expansion crushed weakened seams. Fire licked across the hull like frost. The destroyers had not returned. They had not needed to. Ixion had bled itself hollow. The silence had done the work for them. Kade's hands rested on the console, slick with soot. She no longer blinked. Her eyes tracked nothing. The tactical feed had burned out 20 minutes ago. Behind her, the dome's upper layer showed spiderweb fractures. The stars beyond it were still. Too far. Too uncaring. The air stank of recycled breath and scorched metal, just like it had on day 1, before the first probe. 20 minutes remained. The fail-safes on the reactor core had been bypassed. Not detonated conditioned. If the incursion reached within 20 meters of the coolant wells, it would trigger. No code. No override. A fail-dead loop. Old Earth Fleet doctrine from another era. Varl had made the changes himself. He and 2 others, working in near darkness beneath the fusion chamber. They had rewired the logic triggers manually, stripping relay trees, soldering thermal gates, bypassing every redundant lockout the engineers had once built to prevent this. They would not be dissected. They would not be reprocessed. They would vanish in heat and light, written in fusion bloom across the belt. Outside the belt, 5 unmanned recovery vessels drifted at standby. Observers. Data harvesters. When the station detonated, they would lose more than Ixion. They would lose what they came for. Somewhere in the hydroponics bay, a recording loop still played. Children's laughter, preserved in a forgotten personal file, echoed through dead speakers. The audio skipped every 9 seconds. A burst of giggling. Silence. Then the same burst again. The plants were already dead. Without airflow, the heat had wilted everything green. Vines clung to metal racks. Roots cracked through nutrient trays in search of phantom water. A layer of ash floated atop the remains. Varl heard the sound, faint, rhythmic, and smiled. He closed his eyes. In the command dome, the temperature rose. Kade leaned forward and pressed her forehead to the console. The metal was warm beneath her skin, humming faintly. Every panel buzzed with hidden strain. Underneath it all, she could feel the pulse of the core, an angry heartbeat buried in steel. There was no more movement on the sensors. No more countdown. Only the hum of a reactor preparing to end the war in silence. Kade opened a file, old Earth Fleet protocol. A log format, voice entry. She pressed the final button. Not to send a message, but to record. Her voice was calm. This is Mira Kade. Commander, Ixion Station. If this is recovered, understand this. We held. We were not taken. We broke the blade they sent against us. We are not a tragedy. We are not ruins. We are proof. Humanity is not a line of retreat. We are a line of fire. And if you're listening, then so are you. She paused. I don't know your name. I don't know if you're human. But if you hear this, remember, they can silence systems. They cannot silence choice. Then ended the recording. When the core went critical, the pulse spread in a perfect sphere. The fusion reaction detonated with precision. It turned the station to light, not debris, not ruin, not wreckage. Just an absence. A perfect moment of atomic certainty. The destroyers never got close. The harvesters never got what they came for. No fragments. No screams. Just ash. And memory. The data burst escaped the wreckage before the light reached the nearest sensor. Carried by a narrowband relay drone buried deep in a rock outcropping, the final log from Ixion 9 accelerated through the belt with no trajectory signature, no beacon ping. Just a faint gravimetric ripple that passed between satellites like a breath held too long. It should not have survived. The drone itself was a relic, an old HollerNet probe, its fusion spine cracked and guidance thrusters firing at uneven intervals. Its outer hull bore the pitted scars of micrometeorite strikes and shielding degradation. Most of its systems had failed decades ago, but it had been wired for this moment. Kade's final command packet had armed its dormant black box, rerouted its signal behavior, and overwritten its telemetry signature with a carrier pulse buried in a redundant geological survey format. It left Ixion at a crawl, riding on magnetic tailwinds and intermittent microburns. Then the pulse wave came. The blast passed over it in a wash of atomic light. Its plating warped, its antenna scorched, a third of its data lattice fried. But the core remained. Inside it, a voice. 64 hours later, in a telemetry node deep beneath the crust of Luna Minor, the signal arrived. The node was old, an obsolete hub left functional only because decommissioning it cost more than ignoring it. It hummed in cycles, largely unattended except for a skeleton staff of technicians assigned to scrape inbound debris and sort archival overflow. One of them, Zareen Holt, third shift analyst, 32, 3 prior disciplinary flags, noticed the pattern in a wave of inbound signal degradation. She flagged it first as a corrupted mining ping. Then, instinctively, cross-checked it against known backscatter patterns from the belt. It matched nothing. She isolated the stream, played it back. Static. Then something beneath it. If this is recovered, understand this. We held. We were not taken. Zareen didn't say anything. She stood up, unplugged the slate, and walked past 4 blast doors until she reached the signal verification chamber. She placed the data core in her supervisor's hands, then sat on the floor, back to the wall, and waited. Within minutes, Ixion's final words reached the Terran assembly. It did not go well. The encryption took 2 hours to crack, less than expected. EarthGov's forensic branch pulled the full message from the relay core and transferred it through 7 clearance tiers before the archive blackout team intervened. But the spread had already begun. The packet's metadata was non-standard, embedded with auto-formatting for non-military displays. The log unfolded not as a raw feed, but as a curated record, visuals of fire, station schematics overwritten with burn scar annotations, sensor footage of automated incursion patterns, body counts tracked by hand, then scratched into bulkhead plating, images of wreckage, audio bursts from hydroponics, and at the end, Commander Mira Kade. Her face, smoke-blackened. Her voice, steady. Humanity is not a line of retreat. We are a line of fire. And if you're listening, then so are you. If your station's dark, light it. If your orders say quiet, speak louder. If they say survive, live. But if they say kneel, stand. EarthGov issued no statement. Assembly committees argued over its authenticity. Some said it was propaganda, a fringe act, a psyop. Others demanded verification missions, recovery operations, signal tracebacks. But it was already too late. The fracture signal, as it became known, propagated not through official channels, but through terminals, mess halls, private feeds, through low-priority transmissions and peer-to-peer scrapes, through whisper networks, first by miners, then by outpost crews, then by captains, then by soldiers, then by entire stations. In the lower cargo deck of the Leviathan-class freighter Calumex Dawn, a young systems tech carved Kade's final line into a bulkhead with a heat welder. In the atmospheric dome of Juno, three hydroponic engineers passed the audio log from console to console. When the shift bell rang, no one moved. In orbit above Chiron's moon, a long-range patrol crew printed the message in bold across the hull of a long-abandoned tugboat and pushed it into open drift. It read, "We are still here." For weeks later, the first intentional mutiny in the Epsilon Fringe occurred. An orbital refinery designated URS-57 received a fleet-wide recall. Its orbital tethers detached in protest. Inside, the station lights dimmed, then brightened again, this time blood-red. Crew gathered in the loading dock, waiting for orders that didn't come. The station's commander, a civilian contractor, walked alone into the command ring, replayed the signal twice, then keyed into the main feed. "This is not a request. This is not rebellion. This is the standard we were shown. Then, we are still here. 3 days later, Earth sent a cruiser. The refinery fired on it. And EarthGov initiated Protocol Zero Black, a command-level sweep of comm relays linked to Ixion. 11 were destroyed. 5 black site agents went missing. Still, the signal spread. The ripple spread. In Belt Sector Theta, long-abandoned mining colonies were reoccupied. Not by colonists. By ex-defense techs, scrappers, relay engineers. They had seen the signal. Some of them had known Ixion by name. Others had simply heard Kade's voice and recognized its weight. Salvaged ships became outposts. Abandoned defense grids were rewritten into autonomous traps. The silence was gone. In its place, fire. In a dry dock orbiting the rogue planet Commander A3, a project that had sat dormant for 12 years lit up. Its designation had long been erased from Earth Fleet's active roles. But someone activated it. The project name. Resurgence. A ship's frame black iron, angular, blunt-nosed, and brutal, began to take form. Welders descended like sparks across its midsection. Structural pylons locked into place. A half-assembled rail battery pulsed blue, then dimmed. Automated rigs hissed steam. Its nameplate had already been welded in place, months ago, waiting. Ixion 10. A warning. A weapon. A memory given steel. The war was not over. But the silence was broken. And Ixion had not vanished. It had multiplied. It began with a map. Not an official one. Not one traced by any Earthfleet charter or orbital survey. This map was born in silence, in chalk, on the inside of a bulkhead wall in a comms relay junction near Hades Reach. A rough sketch. No scale. No legend. Just stars, dots, and names etched like scars. Stations that answered. Juno, 3. URS, 57. Outer Laethel. Mining Barrow Theta. Cadence Fold. Rung, 42. Bastion's Drift. Cassette Free Post. Stone Knife Array. And beneath them, scratched deeper, almost carved. Ixion. A single line connected them all. Not a trajectory, not a route, just a tether. The map was copied. Passed from station to station. Redrawn in grease, in etch ink, in welds. Some tattooed it to their skin. Others threaded it into uniforms or stitched it into pressure gloves. Not all who saw it understood. Not all wanted to. But those who did began to move. Not toward Earth. Toward each other. In the Ort-torn rim of Sector Delta, a converted fuel rig called the Spire Hold received its first encoded transmission in 36 cycles. The signal was weak, fragmented, buried under 5 layers of recycled encryption. Not from Earth. Not from command. Just a signal. A woman's voice whispering the tail end of a message. We are not ruins. We are proof. The crew decoded it by hand, then passed it through their filtration buffer, amplifying every syllable. It contained no orders, just coordinates. A place. On the fringe of the Centauri grave, a maintenance ship operating under the false registry Fleet Support 9A jumped out of drift. Its exterior was dull, pitted with solar dust. Its registry plate had been burned off during re-entry 2 years prior. Its interior was hollowed, weaponless, stripped to structural lattice. But its cargo bay was filled with something old, plates of alloy from the original Ixion station. Scavenged. Smuggled. Hidden beneath false medical crates. In the vacuum-sealed pressure bay, the crew laid the alloy into a spiral and anchored it with mag clamps. They bolted names to it, worn badges, melted ID tags, plates carved from emergency panels. Varl. Kade. No fire. No anthem. Just heat from their breath and silence filled with purpose. On Commander A3, Ixion 10 came alive. The dry dock was old, a pre-war orbital husk abandoned by Earth Fleet and later co-opted by smugglers, engineers, and Union exiles. Its power conduits were patched with hull fragments. Its workers operated without pay, fed by hydro rigs and barter packs sent from other sympathetic stations. The ship's spine burned as engineers sealed the core. Power converters screamed. 2 conduits exploded during alignment. 1 technician died when a coolant line ruptured and flash froze his torso in seconds. No one stopped. Not for a second. Every 12 hours, an auxiliary deck officer read Kade's message aloud from the bow speaker. He never raised his voice. It didn't need volume. Each time, more voices joined in. They began ending the broadcast with a line of their own. For the first, for the last. For those who stood. Inside Ixion 10, the walls vibrated with noise. Welding arcs crackled against recycled armor. The scent of scorched plating and old blood never left the vents. One junior engineer, a girl no older than 19, kept a strip of ribbon tied to her wrist. It was torn from her sister's uniform, left behind at Ixion 9. She wore it under her gauntlet. Every night, she etched one name into the inner bulkhead. Not from memory. From stories passed between shifts. She called the wall the Remembered. Across the outer belt, 9 ships unlinked from Terran relay trees. They disappeared from official movement records. Their IDs were wiped. Their trajectories were masked behind asteroids, comets, or radiated dead space. They reappeared 2 weeks later, in orbit around a small star with no name, no station, no settlement, just a scavenger barge orbiting a fractured moon, its hull painted in slag across one side. We are not ruins. We are proof. The 9 ships docked silently. Their crews disembarked and shared food, water, welding fuel. One crew gave up a drive coil to help power another. No commanders spoke. There were no briefings. Just work and waiting. In the rings of Sodophore, where solar light fractured into colorless haze, an old freighter-turned weapons platform, the Hammered Ark, disabled its tether protocols and sent a subharmonic ping across 5 forgotten channels. 2 days later, a mining cutter arrived. Then a second. Then a lifeboat with 4 engineers from a station long since collapsed. They brought nothing. No weapons. No news. Only a panel. From Ixion. They bolted it to the side of the Ark's bridge. It didn't fit. They bolted it anyway. Underneath, someone etched. Hold the line. The Resistance was not a fleet. It had no chain of command. It had no anthem. Only signals. Shared repairs. Voice files. Steel. And one ship at the center, still unfinished. Ixion 10. Waiting. Its rails were not yet armed. Its core not yet tested. But its walls bore stories. Every spare panel that came in was etched with names. Not just from Ixion, but from dozens of other stations. Cargo bays collapsed in silence, crews starved under embargo, workers shot during protocol lockouts. Survivors wrote their own names last. The inside of the ship became history. It was not a command vessel. It was a war grave built forward, and it would not be still forever. In the dark between stations, where no beacon reached and gravity whispered sideways, 2 scout vessels crossed for a moment at 0 distance. Neither hailed. Neither broadcasted. But for 23 seconds, their headings aligned, as if tracking the same point, and each one's hull bore a single phrase. No stars but ours. The first shot was not fired by Earthfleet. It came from a converted fuel hauler in the carless expanse, renamed Bridger's Wrath by its crew, but known to EarthGov as Resource Node 882H. The ship's silhouette had not changed in 3 decades, still bearing the rust-calcified pipes of its original function. It had been flagged multiple times for atmospheric leaks, outdated radiation shielding, and unrecoverable heat damage. But the interior had been rebuilt, firewalls torn out, cargo bays replaced with ventricle-shaped weapons racks, cryopods turned into boarding cradles. The NAV core had been split, reprogrammed with a salvaged strike ship's AI fragment. Its logs showed a crew of 8, but none were registered to Earthfleet's census. It fired once. A single rail slug, forged from asteroid nickel, electromagnetically accelerated to subrelativistic speed. Target: Patrol Cutter E-11, outbound from Sirius Gate. The cutter's core split down the midline. Escape pods jettisoned. They disintegrated seconds later, caught in the cutter's reactor vent. No warning. No return fire. No survivors. Bridger's Wrath vanished into magnetic haze before any second signature could be confirmed. Its drive trail terminated inside a debris field left from a mining collapse decades earlier. Earthfleet launched 3 drones. None returned signal. EarthGov marked it as an anomaly. But Sector Relay 3 picked up the signal it sent afterward. Encrypted, 6 syllables. No return path. For Ixion. In the 8 days that followed, 6 more ships went dark. 2 were cargo vessels bound for inter-system supply runs. One was a forward ops tender returning from the Terran Spire. Another was a relay drone hub that exploded in a microburst pattern, evidence of internal sabotage planted in its coolant matrix. No fleet claimed responsibility. No transmissions identified. Only fragments were recovered, jagged hull plates, black box pings ending mid-sentence, void-cooked corpses with personal effects still clutched in their frozen hands. One wore a locket. Another held a wrench. A third had etched a name into their glove's wrist before they died. But each had one shared anomaly. Each wreck had been tagged, some with plasma burns, others with etched steel or chemical scorches. Each read, "We are still here." EarthGov reacted with familiar cadence. They sent patrols. They restricted civilian traffic in 9 zones, using a combination of diplomatic alerts, asset protection orders, and silent no-fly corridors. They authorized remote drone eliminations on any vessel with a forged ident. Then they initiated the Black Beacon Protocol, a system-wide alert designed to bait hidden rebel ships with false distress signals. Automated screams played through civilian frequencies. 4 ships responded. 3 were destroyed within seconds of approach. 1 escaped. The one that escaped was broadcasting a loop from Ixion. The signal was traced to a junk ring in the Siren Shell, an abandoned belt of hull scrap orbiting a long-dead mining planet. Most systems marked it as a navigational hazard. Few entered. None survived long. By the time Earth fleet arrived, every piece of scrap had been wired with explosives. The entire ring went nova. Sensor logs showed one thing just before detonation, a silhouette larger than a carrier, hidden behind the ring's inner drift. It did not move. It did not speak. No signal. No drive plume. Just steel. The resistance was still not a fleet. It was a method. It was a rhythm. It was not coordinated. It was contagious. In the outer corridors of the Sable Drift, 2 transport crews met at a sealed refueling station. One wore the markings of an old smelter line. The other bore no registry. Neither carried weapons visible to scan. They shared rations. Then they exchanged data slates, maps of blackout zones, and annotated weaknesses in Earth Fleet refueling protocol. In the Trask vein, a transport disguised as a derelict mining barge sent out a pulse mimicking a distress beacon. When a patrol arrived, the outer shell split open, revealing repurposed weld cannons targeting the corvette's drives. The resistance ship did not chase or finish the kill. It simply disabled the ship, marked its hull, and vanished. The word was spreading not in code, but in gesture. In shared air, in fixed panels, in extra packs of coolant and scrubber tape left at agreed-upon markers. On the 45th day after the Ixion broadcast reached Luna Minor, a civilian colony station in the Anthelm Reach, designated Meridian Nest, sealed its hangars, shut down its trade links, and activated a non-standard defense grid. No warning was given. Its beacon turned dark. When an Earth fleet corvette approached, it was turned away by a field of mass-projected chaff that mimicked a shield wall. Its targeting matrix overloaded within seconds. On the station's hull, written in cooling slag by plasma torch, were 4 words. Not yours to govern. Inside, hydroponic chambers had been converted to bunk lines. Workers drilled with modified mining equipment. Comm nodes had been rewired to transmit on Ixion's last known frequency. They didn't call it a rebellion. They called it refusal. And at the center of it all, Ixion 10 completed its first power cycle. The dry dock sealed around it, locking in the magnetic field. The ship's central spine pulsed. The ventral plating shimmered, shedding layers of oxidation from retempered alloy. The core thrummed once. Then again. The main reactor lit the bridge in amber. Systems came online not with precision, but with hunger. Each relay sparked as if remembering its former shape. Power lines sang. Magnetic anchors locked. Oxygen lines hissed. Targeting systems blinked. A memory core activated and whispered a log into the darkness. Unit status, operational. Soul pattern, legacy imprint loaded. Authority, unrestricted. The voice was not synthetic, nor human. It was both. Beneath the readout, in smaller text. Soul pattern defined, composite imprint of command, memory, involuntary loss. Burn seated, non-replicable. A technician on the lower deck stared at the log. What the hell is a soul pattern? She whispered. No one answered. But the lighting shifted. For a moment, she thought she heard breath in the static. A faint flutter in the comms array. Not words. Just something that remembered. She looked toward the forward deck, where a name had been burned into the metal above the command seat. Kade. It had no helm. Only guidance. The ship's hull was not painted. It had been left raw. Scorched black. Edges sharp. Each panel from a station that had fallen. Each joint forged from scrap welded by hand. The ship groaned like a haunted thing when pressurized, as if remembering. It carried no identification. Only the burn marks from the steel it was made of. Steel that remembered. The first to burn, and the next to rise. Ixion 10 broke dock without ceremony. There was no final inspection, no approval code, no escort. Just a shift in light across the dry dock's outer shell as the clamps disengaged. The ship drifted forward under its own inertia, then flared its fusion spine once, silent, searing, clean. Below it, Kayair, A3 hung dead and airless, stripped of every usable resource. The orbiting station, once a black market smuggling node, was already being dismantled for parts. Welding rigs glowed across its hull as ex-shipwrights cut out atmospheric tanks, recyclers, and backup heat exchangers. The smell of scorched carbon and coolant drifted in the airlock seals. There would be no return. Ixion, 10 carried no ceremony. Just burned seeded metal and a name that could not be silenced. The first engagement came 82 hours later. An Earth Fleet scout frigate, Ian Vanguard 7, intercepted a relay echo in the Seraph Belt. The transmission was an Ixion loop, sent on an ancient miner's band with staggered distortion. The signal bounced between comet cores and salvage debris, a chorus of false echoes layered over a single voice. We held. We are not ruins. We are proof. The frigate followed the trace to an ice shelf drifting along the belt's arc. Its hull had been reinforced with carbon ice layers from previous drive tests. It bore no drive signature. No visible energy. The shelf shattered. Beneath it, Ixion 10. The first rail cannon did not fire. It spoke, a pulse burst configured in an archaic pattern, nearly identical to the modulation used during Mira Kade's final log. The sound did not register as speech to most of the bridge crew. But one officer, a systems linguist, gasped and said, it said permission denied. The frigate opened fire. Ixion 10 responded. It did not fire salvos. It fired once. A single burst from its spinal cannon cut through the midship like a blade of kinetic silence. No explosion. Just pressure loss and vacuum rupture. The hull bent inward, then folded. The light dimmed instantly. The scout frigate ceased transmission immediately. Its signal was picked up again hours later, in fragments across 4 quadrants. The debris burned cold. They did not report the battle. They recorded it. The survivors, 5 of them, jettisoned in escape cells, recovered from the wreckage, told the same story. No demands. No contact. Just presence. Steel. And a voice that did not come from any comm array. This fire never folds. It was not auditory. It was felt, like vibration in bone, or memory stitched into breath. The rescue team scrubbed the logs. But the phrase reappeared 3 times. Once encoded in sensor backscatter. Once in the thermal vent noise of a ruined data core. And once in the dreams of the youngest survivor. In the aftermath, Earth Fleet mobilized 5 carriers. 2 were decoys. One was equipped with a mass inversion cannon designed to warp internal magnetic architecture. The others deployed sensor netting and Hunter-class drone wings. They launched from 3 sectors at once, triangulating toward the last known point of the resistance broadcast. When they arrived, Ixion 10 was already gone. But the net they dropped picked up something else. Voice files embedded in radiation pulses. Not a single signal, but 100. Different origins. Different words. All saying the same thing. We are proof. Some were whispers. Some laughter. One transmission was just a child reciting the names of outposts in the belt, Ixion last. An analyst in the signal parsing chamber stared at the waveforms. Her voice was flat. These aren't comms. They're mimetic implants. It's culture embedded in radiation. The carriers scrubbed the grid, deleted, purged, then turned back toward Earth. They did not speak of it again. On Sato 4's 3rd moon, an engineer finished sealing a hole patch in silence. She wiped her gloves, stepped back, and stared at the sigil etched above the airlock. No flag, no banner. Just the cut mark of Ixion. Her shift was over, but she lingered. The lights overhead flickered. Somewhere, deep in the core, a heat exchange valve clicked with lazy rhythm. She adjusted her collar, checked the power levels one more time, then walked back into the dark. She didn't know who was coming, but she kept the lights low and the engines warm. In the broken atmosphere of the Aeron shell, 6 skiffs circled an old relay platform, long since marked for decommission. Each ship bore mismatched plating. One had an engine cowl scavenged from a racing yacht. Another used atmosphere tanks originally built for cattle transport. Each carried signal repeaters. Together, they broadcast a pulse once every 7 seconds. We remember. Nothing more. Nothing less. In a scrapyard on the RAN, too, a child sat cross-legged atop a crate of broken hull plates. Around them, welders hissed and servos clanked. The child spoke to no one, just repeating a story they'd been told. There was a ship made of ghosts. It never stopped moving. They said if you look up at the black long enough, it'll look back. And if it does, you don't run. You speak. They clutched a bolt etched with one word. Kade. Across the belt, across the fringe, across 100 dark systems where Earth's voice had once been the only sound, something changed. The silence had not just been broken. It had been outgrown. Because the fire that started at Ixion wasn't broadcast. It was passed, hand to hand, ship to ship, name to name, not through orders, not through flags, through weld lines, through scorch panels, through stories told across midnight shifts with no stars above. The kind of fire that doesn't announce itself. The kind that waits, and watches, and rises. And somewhere, beyond Earthfleet's reach, Ixion, 10 vanished into drift. Its drive trail erased by dust resonance and ice refraction. Its systems folded into minimal burn. No signal, no trail. Only soot-streaked plating and scorched welds, the same marks that once built the spine of Ixion. Only the soundless memory of steel, still burning, waiting for the next name to carry it forward.